Committee. We do have a quorum present. We have the minutes from the last meeting, and I noticed Representative Khan going through all kinds of papers there. Have you looked at the minutes?
Absolutely perfect, so I would move acceptance of the minutes.
Okay, Representative Khan moves the approval of the minutes for February the 5th. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We have as our first bill this morning the bill by Representative Poppe, the Farmer Lender Mediation Bill. Representative Poppe. Representative Poppe, would you care to make a motion?
I would. Mr. Chair, thank you. I move House File 251 be recommended to pass and move to the General Register.
Okay, the motion is before us, and if you'd explain the bill.
Yes. The Farmer Lender Mediation Act was created in 1986 during the height of the farm crisis and when there was a lot of lack of dispute resolution and lots of concern, anxiety, and it was a serious nature of some between farmers and lenders. And it was created in order to resolve different disputes between farmers and lenders as they were trying to come up with ways to continue to pay the bills and be able to keep the farms in the possession of the farmers. It has been an act that's been renewed over the course of 20-some years. Every 2, 3, or 4 years, the sunset has been extended, and that's what this bill would do. It would extend the sunset for 4 years.
Okay, any discussion on the bill? Representative Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Poppe, I'm not sure if you can answer this question or perhaps if there's University of Minnesota officials here. How much does the Extension Service Office spend of their budget on farm mediation services that they provide? What percentage of their budget is spent on just mediation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson. I'm not sure what the percentage is. There is a memo from the University of Minnesota within the packet, I believe, that talks about they provide $170,000 toward the funds from the 8 ag state specials.
Mr. Chair, Representative Poppe, I saw the memo, but the way I understand the program works, the feds also provide 70% and then the state kicks in 30%. Is the $170,000 on top of what the state and the feds are providing?
Representative Poppe.
Mr. Chair, I'm not able to answer that question, but I think somebody from the university will be able to do that.
Mr. Iverson, can you enlighten us?
Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Todd Iverson. I represent the University of Minnesota. Representative Anderson, the money that is referenced in the memo is the state money that matches the federal money.
Representative Anderson.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Iverson, do you know how much of the Extension Services offices, how much of their effort is spent on mediation? How much of their overall budget is spent on mediation then?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head. I could get it to you later this morning. It's a fairly small percentage of the extension's overall budget. The state special, I believe, is in the range of $28 million that these funds would come out of. So it's a relatively small expenditure out of the extension budget.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Poppe, do you know if the 70% federal match is subject to sequestration?
Mr. Chair, I do not. I don't know if the university would be able to answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not familiar with where the Sequestration Act falls on this or not. I can certainly find out and get back to you.
And Mr. Chair, if I might, given that it appears more and more likely that sequestration actually may come into play, if these funds are subject to that, then what happens to the program if a large portion of the federal funds go away? Is the amount of service available dictated by the money available, or will state funds be required to backfill that shortage?
Mr.
Right.
Chairman, Representative, I do not know that contingency has been planned for at this point. We will probably have to have discussions within the office and figure out the best plan of attack on how to meet the budget and to provide the services that we can. I honestly do not know at this point, so I would be happy to have those discussions and get back to you as to what the plan is as we move forward.
Mr. Chair, if I might, has the university taken on any sequestration planning? Do you have a matrix or a document that shows what programs are at risk?
Mr. Iverson.
Mr. Chairman, we have started, particularly with our federal research dollars that we have got or that we get, working with our researchers on a plan in case of sequestration. But I have to be perfectly frank with you, Mr. Chairman and members. The information that we are getting from the federal government is cryptic at best as to what all the ramifications of sequestration are. And so we are flying a little bit blind, but we're working and doing the best we can and certainly making our researchers and others that get federal funds aware of possible ramifications. But until we get clarification from the federal government as to exactly where the pets will come and how they'll come, it is very difficult.
Thank you.
Representative Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Representative Poppe or Mr. Iverson. How many farm mediation cases were there in Minnesota this year?
Mr. Chairman
Iverson.
and members. The Farmer Lender Mediation Program received 2,919 notices from creditors this year. That included the program handled a total of 1,087 differential ag operations that we dealt with for the program.
Mr. Chairman and
Davids.
To Representative Poppe, I find it interesting in the bill that you can start a farmer lender mediation if you're in debt $5,000. Now, in your wonderful county of Mauer, you would be in debt about 1/2 an acre of farmland. Does that seem a bit low?
Mr. Chair, Representative Davids, we did have some discussion about the limit and the $5,000 threshold. There was, as we talked about in ag policy, there are many new farmers that are coming in that may have a lower amount, a lower debt, and they're doing a new kind of farming, different kind of farming, but yet they're meeting the criteria of being farmers and getting started. So $5,000 was the amount that has been in place for a number of years, but it is the amount that the majority believed should continue.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Poppe, that seems extremely low to be entering into mediation at $5,000. It seems extremely low.
Okay, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this might be a question for Mr. Marks. What is the sequestration? Isn't that across-the-board cut of about 8 or is it 10%? Or, and what programs, have they said what programs it will touch?
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Mahoney, the information we have through National Conference of State Legislatures suggests that for the non-defense programs, it's between 5 and 6% if it's applied across the board. But this material has also suggested that it would not necessarily be applied across the board. And as Mr. Iverson indicated there, we don't have much information yet on just how it might be applied.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, then, Representative Poppe renews her motion that House File 251 be recommended to pass and placed on the general register. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The next bill then will be the ratification of the state employee contracts. Let's see, I will move, now we have, by the way, just background, we have the Senate file has been referred to the committee, so they're identical, and we're going to take up the Senate file. So the chair moves Senate file 58, the first engrossment be recommended to pass. And Representative Lillie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'm impressed with the amount of members that are here this morning. It reminds me of a time when I was in college and I was stuck in Austin, Minnesota, where I was moving back and forth between Luther and Gustavus and got stranded there. And so I'm impressed of our rural or greater Minnesota members that have made it down here. And I was talking to Representative Hausman. I think she had 7 minutes to get here, and we have a little easier of a time. So sorry about that, sir.
Well, this is a dedicated committee.
I'm impressed.
We got a good turnout on a tough morning. On the bill?
The bill before you this morning, and again, thank you for coming, ratifies the labor contracts and compensation plans for state employees in the executive branch. And it's been reviewed by the subcommittee on employee relations, and we've sent it on. It's gone through the labor committee and then the state gov finance, and now it comes before you this morning. And these contracts, I can have. I've got quite a star team here with me this morning. Representative, I demoted him, Mr. Hubinger. And Ms. Holmes from the MMB can kind of go through the bill in more detail if you've got some really tough questions. I see Representative Davids here is ready, so that's good. The kind of the main thrust of the bill, it involves a 2% pay raise for the state workers. And keep in mind that these are defined as executive branch employees, but they're not all in Governor Dayton's team across the street there. They're state workers spread across, all across the state of Minnesota. And many of them were out snow plowing over the weekend here and getting us from A to B. But perhaps at this time I'll pass it to Mr. Hubinger, and he can get into the, I don't know how much you want exactly as far as details of the bill, but.
Well, if he can give us just maybe a quick overview. The testimony was taken in the other committees, so if he can bring us up to date, then we'll turn it over to questions from the committee. So,
thank you, sir.
Hubinger.
Mr. Chair and members, I'm Greg Hubinger with the Legislative Coordinating Commission, and I help staff the Subcommittee on Employee Relations, which is a subcommittee that consists of 10 members, 5 from the House and 5 from the Senate. That subcommittee reviewed these contracts and plans about 3 weeks ago. There are 5 contracts and 2 compensation plans in the bill that would be ratified. These are for employees in the executive branch. They include or represent about 2/3 of state employees and about half of the contracts. As Representative Lillie indicated, if we're focusing on the fiscal impacts, the contracts would provide a 2% across-the-board increase effective January of this year, 3 weeks or about a month ago. The contracts would also continue step increases, which are performance-based increases that employees receive based on a performance evaluation that they receive annually. Only employees who are not at the top of their salary ranges receive these increases. And according to Minnesota Management and Budget, about half of state employees are at the maximum of their ranges and don't receive them. These step increases vary depending on the contract. In AFSCME, they're about 2 3/4%. In MAPE, they're about 3.5%. The other financial provisions relate to the state employee group insurance program, the insurance program that's provided to all state employees in the executive, judicial, and also applies to staff and members of the legislature. There are about 130,000 covered lives. Premiums for all of us went up about 12% in January. Those were not negotiated in these contracts. That's determined separately. But in these contracts, there are proposed increases in the co-pays and deductibles that all employees and their dependents pay when they receive services. Those co-pays and deductibles will generate revenue of about $7.9 million, and that will defray the cost of the program. Overall, the cost of these contracts this biennium is about $76 million. That's a 1.5% impact this biennium. These contracts apply to the 12-13 biennium, so there's about 6 months left. But because of the tails, the fact that these increases are paid going forward, the impact on the next biennium is about 4.9%. And that has a fiscal impact on 14-15 of about $250 million. Mr. Chair, that's a quick summary of the fiscal impacts of these contracts.
Okay, are there questions of the author or Mr. Hubinger? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hubinger, you said for 2014-2015, it's $250 million cost.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, that's correct.
And has Governor Dayton included that as part of his budget at all?
Mr. Hubinger.
Mr. Chair and Representative Anderson, the base budgets for 14-15 are based on the appropriations in FY13. The governor may be proposing change items to reflect many fiscal impacts. Some agencies may have increased budgets based on this. I'm not familiar with that.
Representative Anderson.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Hubinger, so the $250 million would be taken out of the surplus dollars that have been generated from 2012-2013.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, I wouldn't be able to respond to that piece.
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, to the extent that the governor recommended changes in agency budgets and those would be enacted, that would fund these. If an agency budget had no change, the agency would have to absorb that cost. So if an agency had a $10 million budget in 12-13 and still has a $10 million budget in fiscal 14 and 15, they would have to absorb the cost of the contract within that $10 million budget. So it depends on whether there are changes in the agency budget that are enacted or not as to whether these costs would be covered there. But the agencies would still have to pay for those costs. So obviously they would have to reduce costs in other places if there is no change in the agency budget.
Any further discussion? Representative Holberg.
Mr. Chair, I have one more follow-up onto that.
Oh, Representative Anderson.
But then when we're talking about the $76 million cost for this biennium, that's going to come out of the surplus dollars, correct?
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, no, that's the same situation. Agency appropriations are set for this biennium. To the extent that that $76 million impacts any individual agency, they have to manage that cost within their existing appropriation.
So cutting services or things of that nature, correct?
So reducing spending in other areas, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Holberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Marks, when they prepare the forecast, do they put in a plug number, if you will, for general fund cancellations back at the end of a biennium, just kind of a general number? And if so, would you expect that number would be impacted if this is signed into law before the February forecast?
Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chair, Representative Holberg, yes, the general fund assumes it's a $5 million cancellation in the first year of the biennium, a $15 million cancellation in the second year. So it's the $15 million for fiscal 2013 that is built into the budget. I would assume this will impact that to some extent. We seem to find that agencies always have cancellations anyway, and even in years when we do extensive cuts, there are still cancellations. But yes, it will. I'm sure it will impact it to some extent, but I don't think it will eliminate the $15 million of cancellations.
Right, thank you. And if I might,
Representative
Mr. Chair and Representative Lillie, I think it's pretty unusual in this day and age that you have single employee health coverage with no employee contribution on the premium. Do you have any figures across the 50 states, if that's unusual or if that's just something we see only in public employee contracts, because certainly it's very unusual in the private sector.
Mr. Chair and Representative Holberg, I'm going to invite up, I'm going to dial a friend, and we have Ms. Holmes here from the MMB, and perhaps she has some information that can be helpful in your question. Maybe you want to restate it just to give her, or maybe she heard it.
Did you get the question?
Mr. Chair, I did get the question. My name is Barbara Holmes. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Labor Relations at Minnesota Management and Budget and was involved in negotiating these contracts. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I don't have any specific numbers on other states and whether or not the breakdown in terms of what percent they provide of their employee costs for health insurance. I know it does vary widely, and in figuring out whether it means that we have a better benefit or not as good of a benefit, you really have to look at the total compensation package.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Representative Abler.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry I was late. So I just wanted to, from Representative Anderson's question, the question I've had all along, and I think it's clear. I just want just a yes or a no, and then I have a comment. Oh, actually, I'll make my comment, then I'll take my yes or no. I ran into a fellow from Anoka Treatment Center today. His last raise was 6 years ago, and he's at the top of his lane. I ran into a person in the hallway during one of the rallies last year wearing a green shirt. He's making $19 an hour after like 21 years. So for all the discussion going on, these people are not wealthy. That's my view. Just a comment. But and they work really hard, and I'm pleased to represent quite a good number of them with my treatment center et al. But so the tails in this, and actually the whole money in this thing is not part of the forecast at all. It's because they weren't ratified and they weren't current law, they would not be in the forecast. Is that correct? Maybe Mr. Marks can just clarify that, just yes or no, or a short answer or something.
Mr. Chair, Representative Abler, you're correct. They are not part of the forecast, not because of when they were ratified, but because they are just not included in the forecast. These would be basically an outside force, and unless, well, the governor could recommend, but unless legislation actually funds the agencies for these increases, they're not part of a forecast, or as I had said before, an agency would have to manage those amounts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So even if they had been ratified before the deadline for this February forecast stuff, with no appropriation, they're unfunded. I didn't realize that. Thank you. I learned something. Thank you.
Representative Hausman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Representative Holberg's question, it does. I see on the memo that we got that co-pays and deductibles increase in the state employee insurance program, and that certainly would be an employee's contribution to their health care. It's not as though they're totally not paying in any way, and it looks as though there has been an increase in both co-pays and deductibles.
Ms. Holmes.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hausman, that's correct. Single employees, although they don't contribute to their premium under these contracts, on average they contribute about almost $1,000 a year because of the first dollar deductible, co-pays, co-insurance with the various health care services.
Representative Hausman, is that? Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Holmes, I just am curious. I always like to just cut to the chase and get just what is the net impact of this. And Representative Abler has made some good points about the hardworking state employees, which I know all too well with a father that spent 41 years as one. This has a 2% increase average, I understand. And then the steps, about 50% of the people get somewhere between 2.75 and 3.5. And then it has some premium increases, which I would call minuses, and some co-pays. So do you develop an average percentage increase for a state employee under this contract on an annual basis? Because I like to see that compared to inflation. I like to include not only the 2% you talked about, but what the step impact has effect of for averages, and then what actually you mentioned. The copays are $1,000 on the average. What were they before these changes? So if you were to put it all together, does the average state employee net out at a 3.2% increase? And I realize steps and lanes, they only half the people get it, but what is the average? That's what I'm curious. And if you don't have it, if you could get it, would be curious to know, because I have people ask me all the time, they say, oh, state employees, they only got a 2% raise, and then other ones say, that's not true. You count it all together, it's this. And I'm just curious, what did it change from the last biennium? Do you have that?
Commissioner Holmes.
Mr. Chair, Representative, you asked a number of questions there. First of all, prior to the changes in the contracts that are before you, employees paid about $814 on average a year out of pocket for those various expenses I mentioned, and that's going up to about $958 per year under this contract. So that's the impact of that. In terms of the percentage increase, that's essentially what those numbers are that you have in the memo. So in the first year, when it states that, do you have this? And it is a biennial change, but when you look at the average of all employees, because some of them aren't getting step increases, and some of them, the 2% is only effective in the last 6 months of the contract period. So again, when you look at the average increase per employee for all the benefits, all the health insurance, the retirement, the wages, in this biennium, it's small numbers, 1.52 for this biennium. By the time you get to the end of the biennium and moving into the next biennium, it's 4.9.
Representative McNamara.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Holmes, you're helping me a lot. So the $158 is the net, or about $158 was the net that their copays went up. You said it went from some low 8 to 950 something. I wrote 158. It went up. So I mean, when I do that, that comes out to be, that's an 8 cent an hour or whatever it would be reduction in their pay. I mean, that's a cut. That's a real cut to people when they have to pay more on the average. You make the point to say that some people don't get steps and lanes. I realize that, but the average is what I was looking for. And I realize that because it takes effect at the end of the biennium, if you average it out over the whole biennium, it's less than that. But I like to see the effect from one biennium to the next. So did I understand you to say that the net effect on the average of the biennium from biennium to biennium is 4.9% for state employees, or was that the wrong number?
Commissioner Holmes.
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, that's the number, and I believe that's the information that's in your packet that was prepared by Mr. Hubinger.
Okay, so if I would have read it, I'd already know it. Sorry.
No,
that's okay. No, you're not going to offend me. And you didn't mean it that way. I was being a smart aleck, Commissioner.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I could follow up, though, just in relation to the biennium before that, it certainly was less than 4.9. Do you happen to know what that number was in the previous biennium?
Mr. Chair, Representative, Mr. Hubinger is looking for that information. For the previous biennium, 10-11, and I have a number here for all of the collective bargaining agreements, including all of the MNSCU faculty contracts are in here. The increase in the biennium was 0.57%. And that was just in the biennium, and over the biennium it was 1.69%. So the increases were much smaller in the last contract because steps were frozen in the first year, and there were no across the boards at all in either year. And a lot of that cost in those years was attributable to the increase in retirement contribution that the employer had been making in 0.25% along the way.
Thank you. And the very last one, thank you, Mr. Chair, for your patience. Did the 4.9%, did you deduct the increased cost of co-pays, or don't you take that into account? You do deduct that?
Mr. Chair, Representative, yes, we do take that into account.
Thank you.
Hey, Representative Huntley?
Well, Mr. Chair, and the Commissioner can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what she was talking about was the individual and did not include the family coverage for health insurance. And I can tell you that in my case, my deductible is about $450 for me, and it's about $450 for my wife. So you can probably double all those co-pays and things if you have family coverage.
Okay, and Representative Holbert.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Holmes, was the number that you quoted, was that just for single payer, the average employee, or was that across the whole system?
Ms. Holmes.
Mr. Chair, Representative, it was an average across both single and family.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, then I renew my motion that Senate File 58, the first engrossment, be recommended to pass and placed on the general register. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Motion carried. With that concludes our business for the day, and I thank everybody for being here on this difficult morning. Meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.